Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I was 19 when this happened, just starting my sophomore year at a small college in Michigan. Money was tight, so I took the first affordable apartment I could find off campus. It was a small studio in a modest 2-story building just a few blocks from campus. The ad described it as a quiet unit with great neighbors, and I guess I was too eager to move out of the dorms to think twice. The rent was cheap, way too cheap if I'm honest, but I chalked it up to luck. My name's Daniel, by the way. I was majoring in computer science, didn't party, didn't cause trouble. I just wanted a place to study, sleep, and not share a bathroom with 10 other guys. The building itself was kind of depressing. Old tan bricks, narrow hallways with fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly, and walls thin enough that I could sometimes hear my neighbor's phone vibrating. But it didn't really bother me. My unit was 1B on the ground floor, right across from 1A. I rarely saw anyone come out of 1A. The door was always shut tight, and there were 2 heavy locks above the knob, which I thought was overkill at first. The hallway always smelled faintly of bleach and something off. Not quite rot, but sharp, almost metallic. Still, I was focused on classes and ignored it. The weirdness started maybe 2 weeks in. Every night, usually after midnight, I'd hear soft knocking, sometimes 3 quick taps, other times a single loud one, always at 1A. I started staying up just to listen. The visitors never knocked on my door, just next door. I'd hear the door creak open, hushed voices, mostly men, and then it'd close again. This would happen 4-5 times a night. Some of them stayed a few minutes, others lingered longer. A few times I peeked through my peephole, but it was angled toward the stairs, so all I'd catch was the back of someone's hoodie or a heavy duffel bag being dragged inside. At first I told myself it was none of my business. Maybe 1A was just super social. But one night around 2:30 a.m., I was walking back from a late-night diner run, and as I stepped into the hallway, this guy was just standing there, facing my door. He had this gaunt face, deep eye bags, and was gripping something in his hoodie pocket. I froze. He stared at me like I'd interrupted something sacred. I remember the way his jaw clenched and unclenched, like he was trying to decide what to do. I mumbled something like, "Hey man, just trying to get inside." And he didn't say a word, just stood there. Eventually the door to 1A opened from the inside and someone yanked him in. The door slammed shut and I locked myself in my unit so fast I dropped my food. After that night I couldn't relax. I started sleeping with a kitchen knife under my pillow, which sounds dramatic, but if you'd seen that guy's face, you'd get it. I stopped inviting friends over and made up excuses to study at the library just so I wouldn't be in the building after dark. Every time I passed 1A, I felt this pressure in my chest, like something was watching me from behind the peephole. One time I swear I heard whispering just as I walked by, 2 voices, one of them crying softly. I paused for half a second before walking faster. I didn't want to know. I really didn't. The confrontation came about a week later. I'd been pulling an all-nighter for a programming assignment and stepped into the hallway around 3 a.m. to clear my head. As soon as I opened my door, a man came barreling out of 1A. I jumped back, and he shoved me hard against the wall. His breath smelled like gasoline and cigarettes, and he had this wild look in his eyes like he hadn't slept in days. "You didn't see shit, you hear me?" he snapped. His face was inches from mine. "You keep your fucking mouth shut." Before I could say anything, the door creaked open again and he slipped back inside. I stood there, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. That was the first time I seriously considered calling the cops. I even picked up my phone, but what was I supposed to say? "Hi, my neighbor's apartment is too active at night and someone shoved me." I didn't have proof of anything. Still, something about his face stuck with me, like he wasn't just trying to intimidate me. He looked desperate, scared. That night I barely slept. I kept thinking about what might be going on behind that door. Who was inside? Who might be trapped? And I hated myself for being too scared to find out. The next day, everything exploded. I was sitting in my room around noon, finally getting some rest, when I heard heavy boots in the hallway and someone shouting, "Police! Search warrant!" It sounded like a battering ram hit the door to 1A. I jumped up and peeked through the peephole just in time to see officers in tactical gear swarming the hallway. I backed away, barely breathing. The sounds coming from 1A were chaos. Screaming, thuds, something breaking. Then silence. Just the sound of radios crackling and boots moving back and forth across the old floors. They stayed for hours. I didn't dare open my door, but I kept listening. At one point, I heard someone cry out in pain. Then there were more voices. Women's voices. One of them was sobbing, saying over and over, "Please, I just want to go home." Another was begging for water. I could barely process what I was hearing. I heard the officers talking in low tones, using words like secured, detained, and transport. It was like the hallway outside my door had turned into a war zone. Eventually, the building went silent again, but that silence felt heavier than anything I'd ever experienced. A detective knocked on my door later that afternoon. His name was Officer Lyman, and he looked exhausted. Late 40s, clean-shaven, dressed plain. He asked if I'd seen or heard anything in the past few weeks. I told him everything. The late-night visitors, the man who shoved me, even the crying I'd heard. He just nodded and scribbled notes without much reaction. I remember asking him point blank, what the hell was going on in there? And I'll never forget what he said. "You were living next to a trafficking hub. Drugs, women, maybe even minors. You're lucky you didn't get involved." The building emptied out after that. They boarded up 1A the next morning, and within a week, almost every tenant had left. I don't know if they moved voluntarily or if they were all part of it, but it was like the entire building exhaled and collapsed in on itself. I stuck around just long enough to find a new place, but those last nights were the worst. I kept imagining all the things that might have happened just a few feet away from me. The screams that never made it through the wall. The eyes behind that peephole watching me every time I walked by. Sometimes I still think about the people I heard inside that apartment. I never got their names, never saw their faces. Just fragments, echoes from behind a cheap wooden door. And I wonder what would have happened if I'd knocked just once. Or if that guy in the hallway had pulled something from his pocket instead of walking away. It's like I brushed up against something massive and evil and walked away without really understanding it. I still have dreams where I'm back in that hallway, only this time, the door to 1A opens for me. Anyway, I don't live in Michigan anymore. I moved across the country and I'm finishing my degree somewhere else. It took a while for the panic attacks to stop, and I still keep a knife by my bed, just in case. I guess I wanted to share this here because I think some of us live next to nightmares and don't even know it. I sure didn't. Not until it was almost too late. I was 27 when this happened, just a few months into living alone for the first time. I'd moved into a duplex on the edge of a quiet suburban street in Aurora, Colorado. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. One bedroom, a little front porch, and the kind of silence at night that makes you second-guess whether you locked the door. I worked remotely doing freelance design work, so I was home most of the day. I liked the solitude, at least I used to. At the time, I was going through a rough breakup and needed space to feel like myself again. That house gave me that, until it didn't. The first time I saw him, I was taking the trash out. It was around 8 p.m., already dark, and he was standing at the end of my walkway, maybe 30 feet away, just looking at the house, not moving, not smoking, not talking, just staring. He looked like someone's tired uncle, older, maybe mid-50s, thinning gray hair under a dirty baseball cap, heavy-set with deep lines in his face. He didn't look homeless or dangerous, just off. When he noticed me looking, he turned around and walked away without saying a word. I told myself he was probably lost or maybe visiting someone in the other unit. It was a duplex after all. I went back inside, triple-locked the door, and didn't think much of it. But then it happened again. And again. Over the next few weeks, I'd catch glimpses of him, either standing by the sidewalk or slowly walking toward the porch before turning around at the last second. Never rang the bell. Never knocked. Just stood there like he was trying to remember something. Once I watched him through the blinds as he stood with his hand on the doorframe for nearly a minute before walking off. I considered calling someone, but what could I say? That a man keeps looking at my house? It didn't feel like enough. Still, every time I heard footsteps outside, my stomach would knot up. I stopped sitting in my living room with the lights on after dark. One night, and I remember the exact date, March 11th, got worse. I'd just finished brushing my teeth and was walking past the front door to head to bed. That's when I saw the silhouette. Someone was standing on my porch, backlit by the motion sensor light. I turned off the hallway lamp and crept to the peephole. It was him. But this time, he wasn't just standing there. He was fidgeting with something. I couldn't see exactly what. Keys? Tools? His hands were shaking a little. Then he bent down and pulled something from his jacket. That's when I realized he was trying to unlock my door. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear. I backed away from the door, holding my breath, terrified that even a single creak in the floor would alert him that I was right there. I grabbed my phone and called 911 with my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I whispered into the receiver, told the dispatcher that someone was trying to break in, gave my address and just kept repeating, "Please hurry, please hurry." The woman on the line was calm, told me to stay on the line, told me help was on the way. Meanwhile, I watched as he kept trying different things. Cards, what looked like keys, even his shoulder once gently testing the door. He wasn't frantic. He was patient. Too patient. I remember crouching down behind the door and just staring at the deadbolt, watching it tremble slightly every time he messed with it. It felt like hours, but I know it was probably just 5 minutes. He never said anything. Not a word. Then right before the red and blue lights flashed outside, he stepped back and walked off the porch, like nothing had happened. Just casually strolled down the sidewalk and disappeared around the corner. By the time the police got there, he was gone. I gave them a full description, told them everything, but they didn't seem too hopeful. Sometimes these guys circle back, one officer told me, which didn't help at all. They patrolled the area a bit, then left. I barely slept that night, and when I did, I kept jolting awake thinking I'd heard something at the door. The next day, I went out and bought a security camera and a new lock, one of those smart ones with a code. I also told my neighbor, Dana, who lived in the other half of the duplex, and she got this tight look on her face. She told me she hadn't seen him, but promised to keep an eye out. I didn't leave the house for a couple of days after that unless it was absolutely necessary. The footage I got from the new camera over the next few nights showed nothing. Until it did. 4 days later, just after 2 a.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I was already half awake. I'd been sleeping with the bedroom light on, jumpy at every little creak. I opened the camera feed, and there he was again. But this time, he stood even closer to the door, his face tilted toward the peephole like he knew I was on the other side. I froze. I didn't move. He stood there for almost 2 full minutes, then pulled something from his coat, a small piece of paper, and slid it into the crack between the door and the frame. Then he turned and left. I waited until sunrise to open the door. The note read, "Wrong house?" with a question mark. I didn't know what to make of it. The handwriting was tight and sharp, like someone who took their time. I stared at that piece of paper for so long, my coffee went cold in my hands. Why was it a question? Why had he come back just to leave that? The next thing I did was take the note to the police station. I didn't even call this time. I just drove it over myself and asked to speak to someone. Luckily, one of the same officers from the first night was there, Officer Holloway, and when I handed him the note, something in his expression changed. He asked if he could keep it and stepped out of the room to make a call. I waited for 20 minutes before he came back and said, "We might know who he is." Apparently, there was an ongoing investigation involving a man named Dennis Alcott. He was recently divorced, mentally unstable, and had violated a restraining order against his ex-wife just a few months prior. The problem was, she'd moved and never told him where. According to the report, he'd been trying to track her down. Her last known address? The other half of my duplex, Dana's place, but she had only lived there for about a year, and it turns out the woman who lived there before her was his ex-wife. Her name was Melissa, same build as me, similar dark hair. I felt like my stomach dropped into the floor. So basically, this man had been showing up thinking I was Melissa, or that Melissa had come back, or maybe, and this is the part that still makes my blood run cold, he knew I wasn't her and just didn't care anymore. They told me he had a history of violence and that when he was arrested years ago, he'd told police he'd finish the job someday. The night he tried to open my door, he wasn't just confused, he was hunting. And I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. They said I was lucky I'd called when I did. They increased patrols in the neighborhood and told me to keep my camera on. But by then, it felt like the damage was already done. To my sense of safety, to my sleep, to my trust. I didn't stay much longer after that. A month later, I broke my lease, packed everything, and moved in with my sister across town. The landlord didn't even charge me for breaking the contract. He said he understood. I still check my cameras obsessively, even though I don't live there anymore. And I still flinch when I hear footsteps outside my door at night. I don't know what happened to Dennis after that. The police never followed up with me. Maybe he's locked up somewhere, maybe he found someone else to stalk. All I know is that if I hadn't listened to my gut that night and stayed quiet behind that door, this might be a very different kind of story. I'm not really the type of person who posts stuff like this, but what happened to me last fall still keeps me up some nights. I was 26 at the time, just a year into living in a quiet little neighborhood outside Louisville, Kentucky. I'd moved there after landing a remote job with a marketing firm, and to be honest, I liked the peace. It was mostly retirees and young couples, and I kept to myself. My life was pretty routine. Work, gym, errands, repeat. I'm not antisocial or anything, just not the type to get involved in neighborhood potlucks or wine nights. So when this woman named Cheryl moved in 2 houses down, I didn't think much of it. Cheryl was maybe in her early 40s, blonde, always wearing these long floral skirts even when it was chilly, and she had this overly cheerful voice that reminded me of those salespeople who don't blink. The first time we talked was when she caught me bringing in groceries. She was friendly enough, too friendly, honestly. Said she'd just moved from Georgia to be closer to good people, whatever that meant. Within a week, she'd invited me to dinner 3 separate times. I declined politely every time, said I was busy with work, which wasn't even a lie. She'd just smile and say, "You'll come around, sugar," like it was inevitable. At first, I brushed it off. People get lonely, I get it, but it started to feel off. She'd be outside every time I got home, like she knew exactly when I pulled into the driveway. Once I was heading to the trash bins and I swear she was just standing in her backyard in the dark. No porch light on, just watching. I told myself I was overthinking it, that maybe she's just eccentric. But then I found a note tucked under my windshield wiper. It just said, "Why are you ignoring me? That's not very neighborly." There was no name, but I knew it was her. 2 days after the note, I walked out one morning to find my front right tire completely slashed. Not just flat, cut. Like someone took a knife and went to town on it. I filed a report with the local police, but they basically shrugged it off. No cameras, no witnesses, and honestly, they didn't seem too surprised. That same night, someone banged on my front door around 2 a.m. When I looked through the peephole, no one was there, but a second note was taped to the door. This one just said, "You're being rude." in red marker, underlined twice. At that point, I couldn't pretend it was random anymore. I bought a motion sensor light for the front porch and a cheap camera for the driveway. I even changed my work schedule to avoid coming home at the same time every day, but Cheryl kept finding ways to get under my skin. One evening, I opened my mailbox and found a single photograph inside. It was a picture of me taken from behind, walking into my house. No envelope, no note, just the photo. I felt this weird mix of rage and panic, like someone had reached inside my home without even opening the door. I finally confronted her. It was a Saturday afternoon and she was out watering her lawn, acting like everything was totally normal. I walked over, trying to stay calm, and asked if she knew anything about the notes or the photo. She blinked like I'd just told her the sky was green. Then she smiled, way too slow, and said, "You really should have come to dinner, Jacob." It could have been so nice between us. My stomach dropped. I hadn't told her my name, it wasn't on the mailbox. We'd never exchanged numbers, and I didn't use social media, but she said it like she'd known it all along. I told her, as firmly as I could, that if anything else happened, anything, I'd call the police again. She didn't argue. She just kept smiling and said, "You can try." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every little sound made me jump. Around 3:30 a.m., I heard the camera on the driveway chime. I checked the feed on my phone and there she was, standing in the middle of my driveway looking straight at the lens, not moving, not knocking, just staring. Her eyes were wide open, her head slightly tilted, like she was studying the camera itself. I didn't go outside. I just watched until she finally walked away 20 minutes later. The police came again in the morning, but it was the same story. No crime technically committed. They gave me a brochure about filing for a restraining order, but even the officers seemed unsure whether it would actually help. I started parking my car a few blocks away and walking home, just to make it harder for her to track me. I even stayed with a friend for a few nights, but when I came back, there was a small package on my front porch. Inside was a dinner plate, real porcelain, with some kind of raw meat on it, wrapped in cellophane. No note this time. Just a sticky label that said, "For Jacob." I threw the package out without even opening the wrapping fully. The smell alone made me gag. It was metallic and sour, like meat that had been sitting out way too long. That same night, I decided to sleep with the bedroom door locked and a baseball bat next to the bed. I barely got any rest. Around 1 a.m., I heard footsteps. Not outside, inside. Slow, deliberate creaking on the hallway floorboards. My heart nearly stopped. I reached for my phone, but before I could dial 911, the sound just stopped. No more footsteps, no door opening, nothing. I stayed completely still for what felt like hours. In the morning, I checked every door and window. Nothing was broken, nothing unlocked. But in the center of my living room rug was a single fork. Just one, polished and clean, lying perfectly parallel to the lines in the fabric. I don't even own a set that looks like that. I called the police again, begged them to send someone. They came out, did a sweep, but again, no forced entry. One of the officers actually suggested I might be sleepwalking. I wanted to scream. Cheryl wasn't mentioned in their report. I know because I asked to see it. It was like they didn't want to deal with her. I finally managed to file a restraining order. It took paperwork, a court appearance, and me showing the judge the security footage and the photo from my mailbox. The judge approved it, but said it wouldn't take effect until she was officially served. That was the problem. She disappeared. Her house was suddenly empty, curtains drawn, no car in the driveway. She didn't answer the door, and nobody in the neighborhood had seen her. For days, it was like she'd vanished into thin air. I started to relax, just a little. Thought maybe she got scared off when things got more official. That feeling didn't last. A week later, I woke up to a loud banging on my bedroom window. Not knocking, banging like someone was using both fists. I jumped out of bed and pulled the curtain back. Nothing. But taped to the glass, on the outside, was a handwritten note in the same red marker. "No one's gonna love you like I do." I lost it. I called 911 and told them I was done waiting for her to cross a legal line. I told them I was afraid for my life. They finally agreed to post a patrol car near my house overnight. That one night at least. The cop sat in his car down the street from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Nothing happened. No strange noises, no shadowy figures in the driveway. He even knocked on my door the next morning to check in and said, "Looks like your ghost took the night off." I laughed, but it felt hollow. That morning, when I stepped out onto the porch to get some air, I noticed something stuck in the bush beside my steps. A small cassette recorder, like old-school analog. There was a piece of masking tape across the front with "Play Me" written on it. I didn't bring it inside. I drove straight to the police station. They took it seriously that time. Probably because it was physical, tangible evidence. The officer who listened to it first came back into the room about 20 minutes later, visibly pale. He said the tape was just breathing. That's all. Breathing and whispering. My name. Over and over again. At one point, it sounded like she was right up against the mic saying, "I'm already inside." They ran it for fingerprints, but she wasn't in any system. Apparently Cheryl, if that was even her real name, had left no paper trail. The house she'd been renting was under someone else's name. Fake ID, no lease, nothing connected. It's been almost a year since then. I moved. New city, new job. Even changed my phone number and deleted every old social media account. I haven't had any more notes, no photos, no meat packages. But I still keep a bat by the bed. Still glance twice at anyone who stares too long at me in public. Every creak in the floorboards still hits different. And sometimes when it's quiet late at night, I swear I can hear something just beyond the wall. Like soft footsteps pacing back and forth. I tell myself it's just the building settling. I never found out who she really was. The cops think she was obsessed, maybe unwell, maybe dangerous enough to keep running. I don't know. What I do know is this: if someone ever knocks on your door too many times and you get that gut feeling that something's wrong, trust it. Don't second guess it. Don't worry about being rude. I was polite, I was careful. I did everything right. And still, she got inside. I was 25 when this happened, and I'd just moved to a small town in upstate New York to start fresh after a messy breakup. I didn't have much money saved, so when I found a cheap basement apartment in a quiet residential neighborhood, I didn't think twice. The place was owned by an elderly couple, Harold and Miriam. They lived upstairs in the main house, and I rarely saw them apart from the occasional good morning if we crossed paths on the driveway. The apartment was tiny. Low ceilings, old tile floors, that slight musty smell you can't scrub out no matter how many candles you burn. But it was private, and that's all I really cared about at the time. The first couple of weeks were uneventful. I worked remotely, so most days I was just on my laptop, drinking too much coffee and taking long walks through the neighborhood to clear my head. Harold and Miriam kept to themselves. Harold had this weird, stiff way of smiling, like he was forcing it with his whole face. But Miriam always seemed warm. She brought down cookies once and reminded me not to leave food out because of mice. Still, something about the house always felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it. Sometimes when I'd come back from the store or a walk, I'd swear I'd left the basement door locked. And it wasn't. It was probably around the third week that I heard it for the first time. It was just after 1 a.m., and I was brushing my teeth when I heard this faint sound through the vent near the ceiling, like someone crying. At first I thought it was the TV upstairs, or maybe one of those true crime documentaries older folks seem weirdly into. But when I turned everything off and listened closely, it didn't sound like a TV. It sounded like actual crying, quiet, desperate sobs. They went on for maybe 3 or 4 minutes, then just stopped. I remember standing in the dark of my little kitchen, toothbrush in hand, frozen. The next morning, I tried to laugh it off. Sleep deprivation, echo from a neighbor's house, maybe a weird dream that lingered too long. I didn't want to be that tenant. paranoid, dramatic, making something out of nothing. But a few nights later, it happened again. Same time, same sound. Muffled sobbing like someone trying not to be heard. This time, it was followed by something even weirder. A dull thud. Just once. Then silence. My stomach dropped. I didn't sleep at all that night. I kept the bathroom light on and sat on my bed until the sun came up. By the fifth night of this, I started recording audio on my phone and placing it near the vent before I went to bed. I didn't know what I was expecting. Proof, maybe. Validation that I wasn't losing my mind. The recordings mostly picked up static, my own footsteps, the creak of pipes. But on the third night, I caught it. The sobbing. Faint but unmistakable. And something else too. A whisper. I replayed it at least 20 times. It sounded like a woman's voice saying, "Please, I won't tell anyone." My blood ran cold. I just sat there on the edge of my bed, phone in hand, completely still. That whisper didn't sound acted. It sounded real, terrified, broken. I wanted to confront Harold and Miriam, but what was I supposed to say? "Hey, I think you're keeping someone prisoner under your house?" I didn't even know for sure where the sound was coming from. My vent was against the far wall, the one closest to the crawl space I'd never explored. I started looking around more during the day, knocking gently on parts of the basement wall like I was some kind of detective. One afternoon, I noticed a hairline crack behind a shelf. When I pressed my ear against it, I could feel a breeze. That wall wasn't solid. Something was behind it. The next evening, I made up some excuse to go upstairs. I told Miriam I'd locked myself out and asked if she had a spare key. She invited me in, and while she rummaged through a drawer in the kitchen, I took a quick glance around. Their house was spotless, a little too spotless. No clutter, no pictures of family. The air smelled like bleach. But what really stood out was the hallway door that led down to the same basement I lived in. It had 3 locks on it, deadbolts. One of them was the kind you'd see on a storage unit. I thanked her for the key and left as quickly as I could, my heart pounding. That night, I stayed up with the lights off and waited by the vent. Around 1:12 a.m., the crying started again. But this time, I heard something new. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, like someone pacing in a small space. Then I heard a metallic sound, like a latch being turned. I leaned in closer, barely breathing. Then, all at once, the crying stopped. What came next was the sound of someone knocking. Not on the wall, but directly on the vent, 3 steady taps. I fell backward off the chair I was kneeling on. My phone slipped from my hand. I didn't scream, but I wanted to. The rest of that night, I didn't move. I sat on the bed with my back against the wall, knees to my chest, and the vent in full view. I kept waiting for something else. A voice, another knock, anything. But it stayed quiet. I kept replaying the sound in my head. Someone had tapped the vent from the other side. That meant there was space back there. A room. I couldn't shake the image of someone crouched in the dark, pressing their face to the vent, begging for help. I didn't sleep. I barely blinked. I wanted to leave, but my keys were by the door, and I was too scared to even cross the room. The next morning, I called in sick to work and walked 3 blocks to a diner just to think. I kept telling myself it was none of my business, that maybe I was imagining things. But then I remembered the whisper on the recording. "Please, I won't tell anyone." That wasn't imagination. That was real. I considered calling the cops, but what would I even tell them? "Hi, I live in a basement and I think there's someone being held captive behind my wall." I knew how crazy it sounded. I opened the recording app on my phone again and played the audio in the middle of that booth, even though it made my skin crawl. That was all I had. That night, I decided I had to check behind that cracked wall. I moved the shelf aside, grabbed the hammer from my emergency kit and tapped at the edge. The wall wasn't brick, it was fake paneling, thin. Someone had covered it deliberately. My hands were shaking so hard I had to stop twice, but eventually I pried a piece loose. Behind it was a dark, narrow gap that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. The air was colder, damp, and smelled like wet wood. I turned on my flashlight and aimed it inside. What I saw wasn't a person, but it was definitely a room. A hidden room. The floor was concrete and the walls were unfinished. There was a folding chair, a chain bolted to the wall, and a thin, moldy mattress in the corner. The chain had a padlock on it, but it was open, like someone had been there and left. I felt a wave of nausea and stumbled back. My heart was hammering in my ears. Then I heard something, a creak, above me, from upstairs. The ceiling joists groaned with pressure, like someone was walking across the floor above the hidden room. Then a door slammed, and heavy footsteps rushed across the living room upstairs. I killed my flashlight and backed into the corner, holding my breath. I stayed hidden in the corner of my basement for what felt like an hour. Every creak, every shift in the house made me flinch. I kept thinking Harold or Miriam was going to open the door, come down and find the wall torn open. At some point I heard a soft knock upstairs, followed by murmuring. I couldn't make out the words, just the tone. Urgent, like someone panicking in whispers. When it finally went quiet again, I didn't take any chances. I shoved the shelf back in front of the wall, grabbed my phone, and climbed out the basement window into the backyard. I didn't even stop to grab my keys or wallet. I just ran. I called the police from the gas station 3 blocks away. I told them everything. The recordings, the wall, the room, the sounds. They came fast. When they got there, they found the paneling exactly as I'd left it. But the chair, mattress, and chain, gone. Like someone had cleared it all out in the hour between me leaving and them arriving. The cops searched the whole house, but they said they couldn't find any sign of a captive or illegal activity. Harold and Miriam claimed I'd been acting paranoid, said I was a sweet girl but a little high-strung. One of the officers even asked if I'd been drinking. It was humiliating. I moved out that same day. A friend drove up from the city to get me, and I crashed on her couch for a few weeks until I found a new place. I never heard from Harold and Miriam again, and I didn't try to follow up. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, I still wake up with the sound of that whisper in my ears. Please. I won't tell anyone. And the worst part is, I didn't. I didn't tell anyone who could actually help. I just ran. I still have the audio file. I don't play it anymore, but I can't bring myself to delete it either. Looking back, I honestly don't know what I stumbled into. Trafficking? Abuse? Some twisted secret I was never meant to uncover. All I know is that someone, was down there. And Harold and Miriam were involved. Whether the police believed me or not, I trust what I saw, what I heard. Sometimes I even wonder if they moved and started it all over somewhere else, renting out their basement, picking the right tenant, waiting for someone who wouldn't ask too many questions. I don't think I'll ever really get closure, but I'm still here. And I got out. I'm Mark, 32 now, but this happened back in 2021, a few months after my wife Ashley and I got married. We just bought our first house together, tiny place at the end of a cul-de-sac in a sleepy Pennsylvania suburb. We were excited for the quiet, the kind of neighborhood where people wave when they drive past, dogs bark but never too late, and everyone keeps their lawn neat like it's a silent competition. It felt like the perfect fresh start after years of noisy apartments. I worked remote doing IT consulting, and Ashley was starting her new job at a local dental office. Life was just beginning to feel normal, like we'd finally settled down. But that didn't last long. From the start, there was something off about the house next door. The guy who lived there, Mr. Fenton, I later learned, wasn't unfriendly, but he wasn't exactly neighborly either. Middle-aged, maybe early 50s, gray hair buzzed down, thick glasses that always seemed a little foggy. He kept to himself mostly, but what got our attention was his bizarre routine. Almost every night around 11 p.m., sometimes midnight, we'd see his porch light flick on and his silhouette glide across the yard toward the flower beds. No flashlight, No sound, just him and a small trowel or shovel. Every time, rain or shine. At first we thought maybe he just had insomnia. Ashley joked that maybe gardening was his therapy or something. But the more we watched, the weirder it felt. He wasn't pruning or watering. He was digging. Always digging. Not big holes, just little patches. Sometimes he'd go out twice in one night. He'd kneel down, spend a few minutes in one spot, then slowly shuffle to another corner of his yard and repeat the process. I caught myself staring through the blinds more than once, trying to make sense of it. His backyard had this perfect grid of flower beds, like a chessboard, and he always moved with this eerie precision, like he was following a blueprint only he could see. One night, curiosity got the best of me. I decided to take the trash out a little later than usual just to get a better look. I stepped onto the driveway and pretended to fumble with the bins. I glanced over his fence, didn't want to seem obvious, but what I saw made my stomach drop a bit. There were at least 5 fresh patches of turned soil. Not messy, not rushed, deliberate. Perfect rectangles. And in one of them, I swear I saw the glint of something metallic before he covered it up. He didn't even look at me, just kept going like I wasn't there. When I told Ashley, she gave me this half-laugh, half-nervous look and said, "Okay, that's creepy, but maybe he's just burying tools?" I wanted to believe that. I really did. About a week later, we noticed something else. Every morning after one of his late-night sessions, his backyard looked untouched. No piles of dirt, no tools left behind. Just neatly arranged flower beds. But then Ashley pointed out that the flowers were always changing. Like, completely swapped out overnight. One night there'd be marigolds, and by morning that patch had tulips. No stems or remnants from before. It was like he was replanting entire sections with different flowers, perfectly arranged, color-coded. That's when Ashley stopped joking about it. She said it gave her the same feeling she used to get when she'd visit her grandma's grave, like something sacred was being disturbed. I started checking his yard through our second-floor bathroom window. The view wasn't perfect, but it gave me a better angle. One night I saw him carrying something wrapped in plastic, long, narrow, and rigid. He moved slower that night, more careful. He placed it down in one of the garden beds and crouched there for almost 15 minutes, like he was saying something, talking to it. I couldn't hear a word. The wind was dead still. I remember holding my breath the entire time, like if I moved, he'd know I was watching. Then he started burying it, one handful of dirt at a time. No shovel this time, just his bare hands. Ashley begged me to stop watching after I told her that. She said it was starting to get under my skin, and she was right. I felt paranoid. I started dreaming about dirt under fingernails, about flower beds that bled when you dug too deep. But I couldn't stop. There was something so methodical about the way he moved, like whatever he was doing wasn't random, like there was a plan. I even considered confronting him once, just casually saying hi at the mailbox or asking about his garden. But something about the way he looked through people, not at them, always shut me down before I even got close. Then, one morning around 6 a.m., we were woken up by flashing lights. Red and blue lit up the entire cul-de-sac like it was Christmas. I rushed outside in my boxers and a hoodie, thinking maybe there was an accident. But it was all parked in front of Mr. Fenton's house. 2 black SUVs, 3 police cruisers. Men in gloves and jackets with Property Crimes Unit across their backs were in his yard, digging. And not just digging, they were removing entire flower beds, lifting them like sod and laying them aside like they were disarming landmines. Ashley came out behind me, speechless. We just stood there, watching them uncover hole after hole. I counted 7 before they set up the privacy tarps. They didn't say much at first. The entire street was blocked off and none of us neighbors could get close enough to hear details. Fenton was nowhere to be seen. I don't know if he was arrested earlier or if they were waiting for him to come home. What stuck with me most was how calm the officers looked while pulling things out of the ground. Jewelry boxes, sealed Tupperware containers wrapped in duct tape, even what looked like an old camcorder in a Ziploc bag. Every item was labeled and passed down a line like part of a ritual. The smell in the air was faint but sickly sweet, like mulch mixed with something sour. I knew then it was more than stolen property. Later that afternoon, we finally got a knock on the door. It was a detective, younger guy with sharp eyes and a worn leather notebook. He asked if we'd noticed anything unusual about our neighbor, especially late at night. I told him everything. Ashley stood next to me, arms crossed, nodding silently. The detective scribbled notes without much expression, but when I mentioned the night I saw Fenton burying something wrapped in plastic, he paused. Then he asked me to describe the shape. I told him it was about the size of a violin case, maybe longer. He didn't write that part down. He just looked at me and said, "You're not the only neighbor who saw something like that." A week passed before any real answers came out. The news reported that Mr. Fenton had been under surveillance for months, suspected of being part of a burglary ring targeting homes in nearby towns. They found stolen watches, cash, electronics, even heirlooms buried under the garden. But they also found human remains. That part was buried deep in the article, barely a sentence long. It didn't say who or how many, just partial remains and ongoing investigation. Nobody on our street talked much after that. People avoided eye contact. Lawnmowers stayed silent for weeks. It was like the whole cul-de-sac was holding its breath. Ashley and I stuck around for another 6 months, but it never felt like home after that. We'd wake up some nights and instinctively check the window, half expecting to see him out there again, trowel in hand, tending to things that shouldn't grow. We eventually sold the house and moved 2 counties over. I still think about those flower beds, about what we almost never noticed. If the police hadn't stepped in when they did, who knows what would have ended up under that soil next. I don't know where Mr. Fenton is now. Maybe in prison, maybe in a padded cell. But every time I pass a house with a perfect garden, a part of me wonders, what's really buried beneath the flowers? I moved to Pine Creek in late spring of 2022. It's a tiny farming town in Nebraska, mostly quiet roads, big skies, and wide fields that hum with bugs at night. I was 34 at the time, newly divorced, and I had just bought a modest little house on 3 acres of land. It was an impulsive decision, I won't lie. I found the listing online and something about the porch, the red barn in the back, and the overgrown garden made me feel like I could breathe again. After years of city noise and a marriage that dulled everything in me, I just wanted stillness. I imagined tending to vegetables, fixing up the place slowly, and drinking coffee in peace. That first week felt like that dream might actually happen. The first person I met was a man named Hank. He showed up the second day after I moved in, tall, silver hair under a ball cap, and a deep, worn voice like he'd smoked since the 70s. Said he lived on the property just west of mine, about a quarter mile down the gravel. Told me he'd seen my U-Haul and figured I might need a hand. I was sweaty, halfway through trying to fix a broken gate hinge, and I didn't even hesitate. I smiled and said yes. Hank fixed that hinge in 5 minutes. Then he asked if I needed anything else, and before I knew it, he was hauling a busted dryer out of the garage with me like we were old friends. He had that charm, the kind that makes you feel safe without knowing why. Over the next couple of weeks, Hank became a regular presence. He'd swing by with his truck just as I was about to carry something heavy or start a project I was clearly underqualified for. Sometimes he'd bring fresh eggs from his chickens or extra tomatoes from his garden. I told myself it was just neighborly kindness. I mean, I was used to apartment living, where your neighbor might not even look you in the eye. So Hank's old-school helpfulness felt refreshing. He was full of jokes, little stories about how this town used to be, and he had a way of saying my name like he'd known me longer than he had. It was comforting, at first. But then it started to shift. Not in a big, dramatic way, just little things that made my stomach tense without me knowing why. I'd find my back door unlatched in the morning when I was sure I'd locked it. Once I came home and the porch light was unscrewed. Another time I heard whistling from the woods out back around 11 p.m. A slow, tuneless whistle that stopped the second I turned on my flashlight. I tried to brush it off. Told myself rural living had its quirks, and maybe I just wasn't used to it yet. But then one afternoon, Hank mentioned the book I was reading. Thing is, I never told him about it, and I only read it at night in bed with the curtains drawn. I laughed it off. He smiled like he always did, but something in me tightened. Few days later, I was in the yard pulling weeds when Hank walked up from the road. No truck this time. He didn't wave or call out like usual, just appeared near the fence, watching. When I greeted him, he stepped closer and said he'd noticed the north side of my house needed painting. I thanked him but said I was taking a break from projects for a while. That's when he got quiet. Just stood there for a second too long before saying, "Well, I've already bought the paint." And that might sound generous, but it felt wrong. Like he'd made a decision for me and I wasn't in on it. I laughed awkwardly, told him he shouldn't have, and tried to steer the conversation somewhere else. But from that moment on, I stopped leaving my tools outside. Things escalated after I gently turned down his suggestion that we go into town together sometime. I told him I wasn't really dating, just trying to settle in. He smiled again, but it didn't feel like the same smile anymore. He said, sure, but I know when someone's playing hard to get. That night, I locked every window, even the ones on the second floor. I started sleeping with my phone right next to me. I didn't want to overreact, but my gut was screaming that something had shifted, and I'd crossed an invisible line with him. Then came the notes. At first, it was just one, folded under a rock on my porch step. In shaky handwriting, it said, "You shouldn't be out here alone. Not safe for a pretty girl." No signature. A few days later, there was another one tucked under my windshield wiper. "You look sad today. I can help." I still don't know for sure it was Hank, but I felt it in my chest. That awful instinct, the one that tightens your breath before your brain catches up. I started parking my car in the barn and keeping the lights off at night. I didn't want to confront him. I didn't even want to see him anymore. The weirdest part was how normal he acted whenever we crossed paths, waving from his porch, complimenting my garden, even leaving a basket of peaches at my gate like nothing was wrong. But then I'd find fresh boot prints under my bedroom window in the morning, even when it hadn't rained. Once, I swear I heard someone breathing outside my door just after midnight. I froze in bed, holding my breath for what felt like hours, heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. When I finally got the courage to peek through the blinds, there was no one. But the next morning, the welcome mat was flipped upside down, and I knew I hadn't touched it. I stopped going outside unless I had to. My little dream of quiet country life turned into this constant loop of checking locks, scanning windows, listening for footsteps that may or may not be there. I didn't tell anyone, mostly because there wasn't really anyone to tell. Pine Creek didn't exactly have a bustling police force, and I knew how things worked in towns like that. Hank had been there for decades. I was just the new girl, living alone, probably misunderstanding a kind man's intentions. That's how people would see it, so I tried to document everything. I took pictures of the notes, the boot prints, even recorded the sounds I heard outside when I could. I needed to feel like I wasn't losing my mind. Then came the worst night. It was just after 2 a.m. I had finally dozed off when I heard something crash downstairs. Not like an animal or something falling. It was heavy, like someone had kicked the back door. I grabbed my phone and slid out of bed, barely breathing. I didn't even want to look, but I had to. I crept to the top of the stairs and could see the back door wide open. The screen was swinging slowly. I called 911, whispering, and backed into the hallway, locking myself in the upstairs bathroom. I don't remember what I said. Probably just my address and someone's in my house. I stayed on the line until I saw red and blue lights flooding through the windows. When the deputy finally knocked, I couldn't even speak. I just opened the door and broke down crying. They didn't find anyone inside, but they did find pry marks on the back door and muddy boot prints through the kitchen. I showed them everything I had, the notes, the photos, the recordings. One of the deputies looked real uncomfortable and told me they'd have a chat with Hank, but that I should maybe consider getting some cameras and a dog. That's what I mean about towns like this. You can be terrified in your own home, and still, it ends in a shrug and a good luck. I didn't sleep at all that night. I packed a bag the next morning and stayed in a motel for a few days just to breathe. When I came back, it felt different. The air, the house, the land, all of it. I never saw Hank again. I don't know what the cops said to him or if he just knew I'd finally said something. But he vanished. No more notes, no more baskets of fruit, no more boot prints. I kept living there for another year, but I never let myself fully relax again. Every creak still made me flinch. I got cameras. I adopted a loud, scrappy little mutt named Baxter, and I kept a crowbar beside the bed. That house never felt like home again, just a place I survived. I eventually sold it and moved back closer to family. People ask me why I left that beautiful farmhouse, and I just say, it wasn't what I hoped it'd be. But sometimes I still wake up at night because I think I hear someone whistling outside my window. And even now, 2 years later, I keep the porch light on every single night. I'm not even sure how to start this. I've never posted anything on here before, but I can't shake the feeling that maybe getting it off my chest will help somehow. My name's Erica. I'm 29, and I live in a sleepy little suburb in northern Indiana. One of those places where the sidewalks are cracked. People wave when they pass, and you never expect anything to happen. Back in 2022, I was still living with my younger sister, Maddie, in a small rental house 2 blocks from this bakery everyone was obsessed with. Whitman's Bakes, it was called. You'd think it came straight out of a Hallmark movie. White brick exterior, tiny chalkboard signs outside, always smelled like warm cinnamon and coffee from a mile away. I worked remotely back then, doing admin support for a logistics company, and Maddie was juggling community college and 2 part-time jobs. We had this Sunday ritual. Every week, no matter how chaotic things got, we'd walk down to Whitman's around 8:30 a.m. and split a box of raspberry croissants. Everyone knew the Whitmans, Harold, his wife Denise, and their son Theo. Harold had this thick mustache that made him look like he belonged in a 70s sitcom, and he always wore this red and white striped apron that never seemed to get dirty. Theo barely spoke, but he was polite, always had headphones around his neck like he was just passing time. No one had a bad word to say about that family. They were the neighborhood sweethearts. Things started to feel off in late September. One Sunday, Maddie didn't come with me. She had to open at the hardware store early, so I went to Whitman's alone. When I got there, Denise wasn't at the counter like usual. It was just Harold, and he looked weirdly tense. Sweaty, jittery, like he'd downed 10 espressos. I asked if everything was okay, and he said Denise had caught a nasty bug, which felt strange considering she had always been the picture of energy. I shrugged it off. But the next weekend, same thing. No Denise, no Theo, just Harold, and now he was playing music in the store. Loud, dissonant jazz that didn't fit the cozy vibe at all. Something about it made my skin itch. Then came the missing posters. Her name was Leah Murphy, 22 years old. Last seen leaving her yoga class on Oak Street. That was 2 blocks from Whitman's. Maddie actually knew her from high school. They'd been in the same art class. I remember Maddie's face when she saw the poster on the lamppost right outside the bakery. She just stared at it for a full minute, like her brain couldn't compute it. "I saw her last week," she said under her breath. "She was here, buying blueberry muffins." That made my stomach turn. 'Cause suddenly I couldn't remember the last time I saw Leah, but I swore I remembered her voice. Soft, always laughing about something. Then it hit me. I'd overheard her asking Harold for a gluten-free order, right before she vanished. At first I thought I was being dramatic. I mean, what were the odds, right? A girl goes missing and my brain suddenly decides to make connections that aren't there. But the more I thought about it, the more these tiny details started standing out. Like the back door of the bakery, which I never noticed before. suddenly being padlocked from the outside, or the fact that the usual buzz of chatter and clinking dishes inside had been replaced with this hush. Customers still came in, but everyone left faster. No one lingered like they used to. One morning I went in for coffee and saw a tray of pastries that looked barely touched, like they'd been sitting out for hours. That was unheard of for Whitman's. People used to fight over the last Danish. Something was off and I could feel it crawling under my skin. Maddie started avoiding the place altogether. "I don't know, E," she told me. "I just get a bad vibe." I'd never heard her say that about anything. She was the kind of person who could sleep through sirens and didn't flinch at true crime shows. But now she was locking our front door twice and peeking through the blinds at night. I asked her why and she said, "Because Leah didn't seem like the type to just disappear, and because I saw Harold Whitman drive past her apartment the day before she went missing." That stopped me cold. Maddie had never told anyone that, not the cops, not even me. I asked her why and she said, "Because who would believe me, he gives out free cookies to kids." That was when I made the stupidest decision of my life. I went back to the bakery on a Tuesday afternoon when I knew it would be slower. I told Harold I wanted to order something special for my sister's birthday and asked if I could come back to the kitchen to discuss the details. He hesitated. His eyes darted to the hallway behind the counter for a split second too long, and I almost backed out right then. But then he gave this tight little smile and said, "Sure, sweetheart, come on back." The hallway was dimmer than I expected. The walls were covered with old food posters, sun-faded, curling at the edges. As we passed the walk-in fridge, I swear I heard something. A soft sound, muffled, like someone whispering into their own sleeve. Harold kept walking, pretending not to notice, but I stopped. "Did you hear that?" I asked. He turned around, and his smile dropped for a split second, just a flicker, but it was enough. "Old pipes," he said too quickly. "They groan sometimes." My stomach twisted, and I gave some excuse about having forgotten my wallet. I practically ran out of there. When I got back home, I told Maddie everything. She went pale. "We need to call someone," she whispered. And for the first time in my life, I agreed with her without question. We contacted the non-emergency police line that same night. I told them what I heard, what I saw, and how none of it felt right. The officer on the phone took notes, sounded polite but skeptical, until I mentioned the padlocked back door and the missing girl. Then his tone shifted. He said they'd send someone to check it out. I didn't expect much, honestly. I figured it'd be a quick look, maybe a conversation with Harold, and then it'd all get brushed under the rug. But 2 days later, the bakery was swarming with unmarked cars and crime scene tape. News vans were out front. I remember standing across the street, holding Maddie's hand so tight her fingers went numb. Neither of us said a word. Turns out, we weren't imagining things. Behind the walk-in fridge, behind it, there was a hidden door. The police found Leah in a narrow basement room with no windows, a mattress on the floor, and a bucket for a toilet. She was alive, but she could barely speak. They said she'd been down there for at least 11 days. 11. I still get chills thinking about it. She'd been drugged, tied up, fed just enough to survive. The weirdest part? She told officers she'd heard others before her, other voices, other women. No one knew if that meant they'd escaped or if they hadn't. Harold and Denise were both arrested. Denise had apparently been helping him cover it all up for years. Theo, their son, was cleared, which I still struggled to believe. He moved out of town right after, and no one's heard from him since. The whole neighborhood fell into this eerie silence for months. Whitman's Bakes was shut down, obviously, and eventually torn down completely. Someone put up a "for lease" sign, but no one ever called. I drive past that empty lot sometimes and still half expect to smell cinnamon. But it's gone. The illusion is gone. Whatever innocence this town had before that day, it's never coming back. I still see Leah sometimes. She works at the library now. She doesn't talk much and she always wears long sleeves even in the summer. There's something far away in her eyes, like part of her stayed in that room and never left. I've never told her that I was the one who called the police. I don't want her to feel indebted or weird, but I watch her sometimes when she's shelving books or helping a kid find a story, and I just feel this wave of disbelief that she made it out, that any of us did. Because for months, we bought muffins and smiled and said thank you to people who were hiding something monstrous right in front of us. I've moved since then, Maddie and I both did, but I carry this story with me. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't heard that sound, if I'd just brushed it off, or if Maddie hadn't seen that car, or if Leah had never come in for those muffins. It all feels so fragile, like reality was held together by threads we didn't even know existed. Anyway, that's it. That's my story. I don't care if people believe it or not. I just needed to get it out.